Hello to all of our friends there in Parent Tween Village. I'm super excited to have this conversation with Sam Berkowitz of Sammy B Nutrition, and that's Sammy with an I B Nutrition. So you can reach out to her after today if you'd like, or of course, if you're tuning in, just drop a comment, or even if you catch the replay, drop a comment. So we just talked about ways that we can support our kids in having better relationships with food. And now we're going to shift a little bit to looking at it from the body perspective. And
Mhm.
we're talking about social media and disordered eating. Holy cow, does social media get a bad rap? And sometimes deservedly so, yes?
Mhm. Yeah.
So, explain to us, expand upon what we may already feel
Mhm.
or know to be true about social media and the impact that it's having in terms of the kids' pressure to keep up. And oh, by the way, our pressure to keep up as the
Right.
adults.
Y
Just saying,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, social media has had an interesting impact on mental health and specifically, I think, in the area of diet culture, wellness culture, however you kind of want to categorize it. And
Mhm.
that's really because it's kind of a never ending comparison, right? You can scroll for literally ever, and
Mhm.
there's more people saying, this is how I live my best life, and this is how I
Mhm.
look XYZ, and this is how I did this, right? It's a big highlight reel. And so I
Mhm.
don't think we're really equipped, like at baseline, to handle that much comparison on the day to
Mhm.
day, right? Pre social media, that was, you had the people in your community and maybe the people at school and your friends, and there's aspects of that. But this is like now we're on a global widespread comparison that is just
Mhm.
very intense, and there's always new trends, always new things that are like, if you're not doing this, you're behind, or if you're not doing this, then like you're not healthy or you're not this. And that can be very difficult to, feel pressured to keep on top of all those things and live your life.
Right. And that's hard enough for us as adults
Right.
with fully formed brains. Then when we
Right.
add in, this is something that I feel like it comes up every conversation that I have in some fashion, that like our
Mhm.
kids' brains aren't actually going to be fully developed until they're 24, 25, 26 years old. So when we've got 12 and 13-year-olds who are already going through a lot of body changes, and then
Mhm.
they're looking at social media, if they're allowed to have social media, and they're trying to
Oh.
navigate all of these things that we're struggling with, and they
Mhm.
don't have fully formed brains to process all of it, it
Mhm.
can feel like an utter and complete recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and I think, it's interesting you said the fully formed brain thing, because I turned 25 last year, and so I feel like before that, they're like, "Oh, like, your brain's not fully formed yet," and you're like, "Yeah, yeah, 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 okay." But I'd say, like, with since my birthday in September, that I really do feel like, okay, like, I feel more comfortable in my skin, like, I feel
Mhm.
more, like, not justified, but, like, comfortable and confident in my decisions that I make, and, some of that is, like, some intentional personal work I've been doing, but I
Mhm.
also feel like maybe that, like, switch kinda clicks on and your brain's like, "Okay, like, we're ready to, like,
Absolutely.
dive in."
Mhm.
Um but yeah, it's really difficult for them, especially when they're in that kind of comparison. And especially like you mentioned that their bodies are already having a lot of changes. And that
Mhm.
can be especially true when, everyone kind of has their growth spurt, whether that be, maybe they fill out in weight first and then they grow in height, or maybe they
Mhm.
grow in height first and then kind of fill out in weight. And so that means like all the kids at school look differently. And that can be
Mhm.
very difficult to cope with depending on kind of what your child looks like based on what social media says is like pretty, or that standard of, they might not look like that, especially because they're not an adult yet. But
Mhm.
especially because their body's going through this change, they might even feel that more intensely because they might feel kind of out of their body almost because it is changing
Right.
so rapidly.
So you made an interesting comment, and this actually was a thought that I had during our prior conversation when we were
Mhm.
talking about healthy relationships with food. I've seen a lot of parents, I think understandably,
Mhm.
become concerned when their child fills out weight wise before height
Mhm.
wise. because the
Mhm.
perception is that then they have a weight problem.
Right.
I can't think of any time that I've ever heard a parent express concern, at least not in the same way, when their kid shoots up 6 inches in 12 months, right?
Right.
Which is maybe like, do we think that that's the norm, that we're supposed to grow height wise and then
Mm.
width wise or then weight wise? Like, is it just as frequent that we see kids filling out weight wise or width wise before they get that height?
So I think there's a few things to consider. I think this is a really big conversation that could be many hours long, but our
Mhm.
society is very fat phobic,
Yeah.
and we're kind of set to believe that, thin is healthy, thin is best. And that's just not always the case. And also, just because someone is in a larger body doesn't make them inherently unhealthy. There are many people in larger bodies that have like their labs and all their health markers are within normal range and they're fine.
Mhm.
And same with, there are many people that look quote unquote we would consider healthy and thin and they're very sick, right? So
Mhm.
I think kind of just reinforcing that our body is not our report card for our health. You cannot determine your health
Mhm.
or your child's health by looking at them. And I'd say it is very normal for some kids to fill out weight wise before they grow height wise, or they grow to their max height and they start to fill out and maybe their parents concerned that they're bigger. But I think we need to really kind of get around to, that's kind of where we talked about in our last conversation earlier about kind of not commenting on the food choices and the amount they're eating and not making a big deal, and similar to weight and body size, because I think
Mhm.
one way we can avoid this is not commenting on our own body around them or others, like
Mhm.
making comments about other people's bodies around our kids, as well as you know understanding that their body's going to do what's best for them. And that might be a different shape than mom looks. That might be a different shape than dad looks, right? We don't know. And so many of my clients that I work with, they're like, well, when I was 10 and I was a little bigger, and so put me on a diet or said I needed to lose weight. And
Mhm.
when they're developing, that's such an important time and they can change so quickly. And those thoughts and those things that we foster at that age basically stick forever until they are intentional to work through them.
Right, and to change
And
those
so,
thoughts.
yeah, exactly. So it's really important that we just kind of like, if they're going to the doctor and their blood pressure is healthy and their labs are good and this and that, and the pediatrician isn't concerned, I don't think we need to be concerned.
I like that because that gives us actual numbers, not just a number
Mhm.
on a scale. And I think that's reflective for
Exactly.
all of us, right? Like that's really the indicator
Mhm.
of health. So what are some other steps? You talked about not commenting on our bodies, not commenting on food
Mhm.
consumption and such. What are some other steps that parents can take to help kids foster a comfortable relationship or a healthy relationship with their body? And I think it goes in both directions, right? Like maybe whichever direction they're filling out first. I was the kid who was five
Mhm.
foot two in fifth grade. And oh man, did I get teased for it because I was just super
Yeah,
tall for my age. I was tall and
right.
skinny until all of a sudden I wasn't tall and so skinny anymore. Still tall,
Mhm.
right? But so what can we do to support that?
Yeah, I would say, like, helping them to feel confident in their body, so whether if they need new clothes to fit their body, how it's changing, if that's feasible for you to try and, support them in that, as well as kinda not using fat as a bad word, because we kind of have this connotation in society and in media and all the things that, like, oh, like, someone saying they're fat is, like, bad. But a lot of people in larger bodies are saying like it's just a descriptor. Fat isn't a feeling. It's just a
Mhm.
descriptor similar to how you said like I was very tall and skinny. Like those are just descriptor words. It's
Sure.
not necessarily a bad word. And kind of just fostering that like people that are fat are in larger bodies, like there's nothing wrong with that. And kind of just helping continue that narrative that it's neutral, like we're all just different shapes, we're all just different sizes, and for
Mhm.
some people that means they're larger, and for some people that means they're smaller or taller or shorter, like it's just a different characteristic that we have.
What's your take on physical activities other than sports? Because I was a kid.
Mhm.
I actually wasn't allowed to participate in sports when I was a kid. I think my
Okay.
mom was always afraid that I was going to get hurt. Understand that.
Mm.
But,
Yeah.
what are some ways that, um, I mean, movement is good for so many things, right? Not
Right.
just from I look fat, I look skinny, I feel good in my body, I don't feel
Yeah.
good in my body. But movement is good from a mental health perspective.
Totally.
um, Moving as a family can help with family bonding or strengthening
Mhm.
connections. What are some ways that you can recommend for families to get movement into their day and to help kids see what their bodies can do to strengthen that
Yeah.
relationship?
Totally. And I think, yeah, like exercise gets a bad rep when we're like healing our relationship with food and body. And maybe for a while you take a break from that. But I think, especially for kids, is finding that movement that they enjoy and they
Mhm.
like to move their body. And maybe for some that is sports, but maybe for some that's just like walking and listening to music or, doing yoga or a meditation or, walking a few laps around like I'm gonna say a mall, which like makes me feel old because I feel like malls are like not a thing anymore. But but like just around an area in your community, like it doesn't have to be like sweat and like out of breath at like level 10 to
Mhm.
quote unquote count as movement. Just not getting out of the house or not even getting out of the house if that means doing yoga at home, if that's what's feasible for you. But if that
Mhm.
means walking around the block, what feels good for their body and letting them try different things. And, if they decide to quote unquote quit something because they didn't like it, like that's okay, right? Like we're not all
Mhm.
gonna like the same things. And maybe,
Right.
John likes baseball and Sarah like loves yoga. And maybe that's something they're doing separately, but maybe, we can find something that everyone likes to do together. But it might
Mhm.
take some trial and error to find that activity for the group
Right.
or for the individual.
Right. Well, and I know that that physical capacity, when you feel good in your body, it's easier to have
Hmm.
a stronger or have a more healthy, healthful, loving, compassionate
Hmm.
relationship with your body when you know that it can do things as opposed to
Hmm.
feeling like a lump, you know?
Yeah, and I think also, like, there's a lot of rhetoric out there about that we have to love our body and we have to, like, be so positive about it, and while that's, like, super great, I think a lot of the times it's about, like, can we just be neutral and not negative or hateful towards ourselves? Like, can we just have, like, a neutral relationship? Because sometimes, feeling super good and positive isn't gonna feel feasible on those days where we're feeling really down about it. But kind of being like, "Okay, how can I, like, feel better or neutral about this
Mhm.
instead of negative about it?"
So then how does this tie in to the last point we wanted to address, which is helping to teach our teen or tween to feel comfortable in taking the actions that are right for them? And I mean, this is so important relative to
Mhm.
peer pressure with or without
Yeah.
social media, right?
Right.
But how do we take these foundations and tie them into being confident in making the right choices for themselves?
Absolutely. So I think something can, to be able to teach them to set boundaries in all areas, but especially in this area in particular. So, in our last conversation, we talked about, not comparing our intake to others. And so sometimes it can look like when someone is like, hey, like you're really eating a lot, or, do you really need a second helping? Like those types of comments to either show them by standing up for them or making them feel confident enough to say for themselves, like, hey, like, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not accepting food advice right now. Or I'd really appreciate if you didn't make comments about my food choices or how much I'm eating or my body, please. Like, and it can just be that. It doesn't have to be angry. It doesn't have to be like whatever, but it's like, because their intention is probably good, even though it doesn't feel good to receive the commentary. But to be able to set those boundaries with people and be like, this isn't being rude. This is like, you know, they're making a comment about you that it was not unsolicited. Like, I don't need your help. Or like for my clients that work with me, I always say like throw me under the bus. Like, be like, yeah, I'm working with a dietitian. Thanks for your concern though. Or like you don't need to take those comments from people. And that can especially be true when like grandma makes a comment or someone else makes a comment, and mom and dad can like, in a neutral way, just be like, hey, like I'd appreciate if you didn't, comment on Sarah's food choices. Like we've got a handle on that. Thank you. And that can feel for some people really aggressive and really, direct. But it also is teaching our teens and tweens that setting boundaries is okay. And if someone's not okay with you setting that boundary when it's done in a polite and respectful way, then they're not respecting you and you deserve to be respected.
I love that. What a great concept to end on, because so many of us are, at least a lot of the people that I know, a lot of the families that I engage with, the parents are in a space of learning to set their own boundaries and identify
Right.
what's good for them.
Yeah.
And that modeling is so important for the kids.
Yeah. And it can feel like, especially, if you're trying to heal your own relationship with food or body, it can feel
Mhm.
like, well, like I've messed up all until now. Like, what am I going to do? And that's okay. Right. Let's start modeling now and practice that for yourself and show them now. And
Right.
you can undo that stuff. Right. It's not shaming if you haven't been doing these things up until now. But again,
Sure.
like we're evolving. So show them that you're evolving, and like
Mhm.
they will too.
So even like a, hey, I appreciate that you care so much, but I'm working with a dietitian to help me with a lot of this. And one of the things I'm going to ask you is to help us not make those kinds of comments, because
Exactly.
they're really just not productive. We've got someone on the case. We've got a
Yeah.
professional. So
Yeah.
awesome. Sam, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your knowledge. And I'm sure that there are going to be folks in our community who take more than just a nugget or two away from this. So much of this is, in the relationship realm, it's
Mhm.
complicated, as they
It
say on
is.
social, right? It's complicated. And we're not just talking about like the marital or the amorous relationships, but
Right.
certainly our relationships with food or our relationships with our own
Yeah.
bodies. So I know we've got some stuff here that the adults can take away as we work to empower
Mhm.
our kids. So thank you so much. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.